Good evening, everyone. They call him the subway vigilante. 9 days ago, he took justice into his own hands when accosted by 4 youths on a New York subway train. Since then, he's been a hero to thousands of crime-weary Americans, an object of outrage to others. Today, New York police think they have their man. John McKenzie reports.
We're desperately looking for this man. If you have
a sketch of the gunman had been given to New York subway riders and to police forces throughout the Northeast. Today, a man who fit the description turned himself in to police in Concord, New Hampshire. He's identified as 37-year-old Bernard Goetz, who operates his own electronics firm from his home in Manhattan. At a news conference today, New York police said an anonymous caller had identified Goetz.
On December 26th, the New York City PD special hotline number received a confidential call which identified Mr. Goetz as fitting the description, known to the caller as having a gun and having previously been mugged.
That mugging by 3 teenagers took place 3 years ago and may explain his actions earlier this month. 9 days ago, Goetz allegedly shot 4 teenagers aboard a New York subway. Police said 3 of the 4 were armed with screwdrivers and wanted $5. Goetz allegedly replied by firing a .38 caliber revolver at each of them and escaped into the subway tunnel. All are expected to live, but one of the 4 is paralyzed from the waist down. In the wake of the shooting, the city of New York added more than 1,300 police to subway patrols to search for the gunman and to calm public fears. People here openly supported him, and this evening, subway riders were praising the man.
If he was being robbed, hey, he had to do what he had to do. Self-defense. Simple as that.
If it was self-defense, I feel he did the right thing. It's about time someone stood up for himself.
If that's the case, I think they should let the man try him and let him go free.
Goetz is expected to return to New York within the next day or two. It'll be up to a grand jury to decide on what charges, if any, he will be tried. John McKenzie, ABC News, New York.
There you go.
What do you think about this fellow on Saturday who shot the teenagers on the train?
Oh, absolutely horrible. Sick. They really should do something about it, put a little more security on the trains. I think I ride the trains late at night sometimes, 3 in the morning. I hardly see anyone.
Thank you.
To tell you the truth, I don't know about that one. There's so many incidences that happen all the time that I don't isolate one particular one. I think all the incidences that happen on the subways are wrong and they shouldn't happen.
Thank you. What do you think about this shooting on Saturday, the fellow who shot the 4 teenagers on the train?
It was messed up because, it was overnight and, nobody don't know what it was over, so. And it seemed like the police don't ever do nothing about it when it come down to shooting. I don't know. It's messed up.
Thank you. What do you think about that shooting on Saturday, the fellow who shot the 4 teenagers on the train? No comment?
No.
Okay, thank you.
When you read the newspaper, there's so many that you don't. You're afraid to ride then, and I always ride them.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Let me ask you a question. As we're rolling here. The Saturday shooting, the fellow who shot the 4 teenagers on the train. What do you think about that guy?
I know nothing about it. I haven't read the news.
Good, honest answer. Thank you. At the shooting on Saturday on the subway? Did you read about it? No? Thank you. Saturday, the fellow who shot the 4 teenagers on the subway. Did you know that story? What happened?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
Read about it?
No.
Did you? What? Whoops. A little hard standing here. What do you think about that fellow who shot the 4 teenagers?
I think the guy deserved it for that.
Pardon me?
I think the guy deserved it.
The fellows who got shot?
Yeah, because they was trying to rob the guy, so I think they deserve what they come into. Because the law doesn't do anything once they get killed or anything like that, for that matter. Either the guy go to jail for a few years, that's it, he comes out to life again.
Thank you.
I wasn't on Saturday, so I don't know.
Did you read about it? What do you think about that fellow who shot the 4 teenagers?
It's terrible, terrible.
Some people are saying he's a hero or should have done it. What do you think?
Well, he defended himself. I think he's right.
Thank you. There was, a matter of fact, on one of these trains. What do you think about the fellow who did the shooting?
Well, I think if they indeed tried to hold him up, that he was right in shooting them. They deserved it.
He tried to defend it himself,
Tell me again. You think
I
what?
think he tried to defend it himself,
You think he was right?
in a sense.
Would you carry a gun on the subway?
No, but in certain circumstances, you have to defend yourself.
Okay, thank you. The shooting Saturday on the subway, did you read about that? What do you think about that fellow who shot the 4 teenagers?
I think he's doing I believe he did what was called for. A lot of people are hurting in the hospitals because they can't get back to these people. All right, it's not among the the legalities of the law, but what he did, he tried to snuff out 4 people or whatever he did, to make up for the rest of them. They admitted to their parents they were looking for people to buy, to get $5 from. I don't think it was wrong. Vigilantism, I don't think it's wrong in certain cases now. I don't want people to go running around for dropping a piece of paper and run out and shoot somebody, but otherwise.
About the 4 teenagers.
I think it's unfortunate for him. I think it's unfortunate for him.
A lot of people have told me that they think he did the right thing. Do you think so?
I think so, yes. I think so, yeah.
Thank you. About that fellow who shot the 4 teenagers.
Well, I don't think it should have happened, but then again, it can't be helped.
Do you think he was right?
No, not really. But it can't be helped. I mean, that's just how it is. It's New York.
New York. Thank you. What do you think?
I think the authorities should really, do something about it. It's a very serious situation,
Thank you. Saturday on the subway, did you read about that? The fellow? You didn't? Okay, thank you.
Well, I think, the guy was in the right, the one that shot him, because it was in self-defense. So I hear they had weapons, so, if you have to protect yourself, I think he should have shot him, but he shouldn't have ran away. If he would have got off, I think he would have got off,
Thank you. So, what do you think about the fellow who shot those 4 teenagers?
Well, I just have to find out some more information as to what preceded the shooting. At this point, I don't know all the information.
I think that's a reasonable answer. A number of people have been telling us they think he did the right thing.
Well, if it's in self-defense, maybe he did the right thing. After all, there were 3 or 4 people that jumped him.
Thank you. 4 kids. What do you think about the fellow who shot those 4 kids?
I think it's dangerous. I don't know what the situation really was. They say he might have tried to rob him. Maybe he's trying to defend himself too.
Really don't know. Thank you. You read about the shooting on the subway on Saturday.
Yes, I did.
I wonder what you think of the fellow who shot the 4 teenagers. Do you have an opinion?
I think he should give himself up, get a lawyer, and defend himself.
We've just been talking to a number of people who think he did the right thing.
I don't think he did the right thing. I think he should go and get himself an attorney and let the court decide whether he did the right thing or not.
Right thing.
You do?
Yes, I do. It's very abusive what goes on the subways. I mean, the people who ride the subways every day, it's not safe anymore. I mean, and something has to be done. People have to take the law into their hands. I think he did the right thing.
Thank you. What do you think about the fellow who did the shooting?
I think it's messed up, really. But then again, if they did something to him, I think it was right for him to come back and get his revenge. Nobody got hurt.
They got hurt.
They got hurt. I don't know. If they chose to go to him, in that kind of way, then they deserve what they got.
What do you think?
I think the guy ought to be found, whoever did it.
Do you think he did the right thing?
No. You don't just go shooting people for trying to steal your wallet.
Thank you. I wonder what you think about the fellow who did the shooting.
I think he was right. People just getting fed up being ripped off like that. I mean, it's terrible that he had to injure them, but at least it's a lesson. Maybe somebody else will cut it down, crime on the subway.
Thank you. What do you think about the fellow who did that shooting?
Well, it's very hard to say anything. It's frightening, and also that they are not enough punished and too much publicity about.
Thank you. Mayor Koch says it's intolerable for anyone to take the law into his own hands, but it's frightening to discover that so many New York subway riders disagree with him. Stephen Gear, ABC News, and the light keeps going on and off. We're stopping, so we're going to have to wait.
Okay,
Mayor Koch says it's intolerable. Sorry. Mayor Koch says it's intolerable for anyone to take the law into his own hands, but it's frightening to discover that so many New York subway riders disagree with him. Stephen Gear, ABC News, New York. Mayor Koch says it's intolerable for anyone to take the law into his own hands, but it's frightening to Mayor Koch says it's intolerable for anyone to take the law into his own hands, but it's frightening to discover that so many New York subway riders disagree with him. Stephen Gear, ABC News, New York.
The New York City Vigilante turned himself in today. He was identified as 37-year-old Bernard Hugo Goetz. He surrendered to police in Concord, New Hampshire, saying he was the man who shot the 4 young men in a New York City subway car 9 days ago. That shooting triggered an outpouring of sympathy for the gunman and an argument over his taking the law into his own hands. One report said the 4 were attempting to rob him when he took out a pistol and shot them. One of the 4 is paralyzed from the waist down. New York police said Goetz told officers today he had been mugged 3 years ago in New York, but no other information was immediately available. He has reportedly agreed to waive extradition and return to New York.
It's the camera on the floor and record.
Taking a head count.
Fucking guys.
Lobby of City Hall. Okay. The building behind us. Okay. But we're just tied up. I don't have any key.
Guess you feel you're defending yourself justifiably? Posting you in? Yeah. You got a good shot right next to me.
Why are you going back?
Come on, Bernie, let's go.
Mr. Goetz, what do you plan to tell the grand jury? Bernie, can you tell us this way? Bernie, can you tell us what you want?
Excuse us.
Come on, guys. Come on, guys. Come on, you can't go in, guys. You can't go in. All right.
Actually seeing Bernard Goetz.
What? I don't think I got him. Hey, I guessed myself this morning.
I shot a lot, but I had a couple
Hey, the guy looks at it. Sounds like bullshit to me. Bullshit.
You'll move back. Come on.
All right, Campbell.
You'll move back.
Did he testify, Barry? Barry, did he testify? Just yes or no, did he testify?
Tell us about it later on.
But did he testify? Tell us that, sir. You can't tell us whether he didn't testify, is that right? No. He did, or I just want to know.
Whoa, watch your hand.
Why?
Hold it. Hold it. Roll down the window.
Bring that window down. All right. Go. Now, wait, he's backing up.
Thank you.
Open up.
Our next focus section takes us back to the saga of Bernard Goetz, the 37-year-old electronics engineer awaiting trial for shooting 4 teenagers when they asked him for money in a New York subway. When the story broke, a lot of commentators said his action touched a responsive chord in the imaginations not only of New Yorkers, but the nation. But just what chord did it touch? Charlene Hunter-Gault has been finding out. Charlene?
Robin, the Bernard Goetz story is not just a story about one man's decision to strike back at urban violence, nor even the almost unprecedented public support of his actions in shooting the 4 young black men on the subway. It is a story that continues to open wider and wider a Pandora's box of thorny issues, most of them dealing with the public's perceptions of failures of the criminal justice system, of law enforcement, but also of educational and other institutions in the black community. Then there's fear and rage and racism and the simmering debate over just who is really the victim, Bernard Goetz or the 4 men he shot, or both. In the immediate aftermath of the Goetz incident, attention seemed equally divided between the man in the incident and the massive outpouring of public support for his actions.
I figure there'd be 4 less muggers to mug me.
A vigilante showing up every now and then will have a good, healthy reminder to some of the lawbreakers out there.
Anybody who these little hoodlums try to accost, if they have any means to protect themselves, they should.
Professional observers and students of society offered many reasons for such reactions.
The business of crime on the streets is terribly important. It is a symbol somehow or other that things aren't working.
Willard Galen is a New York psychoanalyst and author of a book on modern anger. He argues that the fears and frustrations in urban life and the seeming inability to do anything about them generates an undercurrent of rage in all of us. Rage most people are forced to swallow.
Even if you're walking the street and someone, particularly if you're a woman or if you're elderly, and someone says an aggressive remark to you, or some kids jostle you, you can't attack them, you endanger your life. So you swallow it, but you are building a kind of rage, and when someone else does something, even foolishly, if it seems like a retaliation, it gives you a sense of joy getting some of your own back.
James Malone, a vice president of John Jay College of Criminal Justice and a social worker by training, specifically cited fear of the subways as part of the reason for the public reaction.
Or fear, of course, is generated when people are trapped underground, and if they were on the street, the escape routes and escape hatches are not available to them, and they feel like they're victims when they're in the subways. Right from the beginning, once you go into the subway, one becomes a little concerned and a little cautious about their safety.
New York City Police Commissioner Benjamin Ward argues that fear of crime is out of proportion to the actual crime in the subways.
Kinds of crimes that happen in the subway are the minor crimes. If they have a dozen homicides a year, it's extremely high. And there's scarcely a precinct in the city that doesn't exceed the totality of all of the crimes that occur in the subway. But of course, if it happens in the subway system, it's a media event. It gets a lot of publicity.
Still, the fears are real.
I'm a little concerned when I ride the subway. In fact, I just now try to avoid riding the subway at late hours at night. And I'm a person that grew up as a very, very tough youngster. I boxed in college. I played football in college. I was a Marine, a sergeant. Went through Paris Island and all of the rigorous training. And I generally thought of myself as a pretty tough person with the ability to take care of myself in any situation. But recently, I've moved away from that. The amount of handguns, the amount of weapons that people are carrying.
But fear over crime in the subways and the outrage it created were not the only reasons cited for the enormous public reaction following the Goetz incident. One of the other major factors cited was the increasing number of people touched by crime in general. Dan Judah, a psychology professor at John Jay, says that even though the crime rate nationally may be declining, the number of victims is cumulative, with new crime victims being added every day.
Not something where at the end of the year you then start over. It continues each year, so that over the last 10 years, there's now a situation in this country where I would say probably close to maybe 30 to 50% of the American population has been victimized or knows of people who have been victimized.
Bernhard Goetz was a mugging victim, and that may help explain why he acted the way he did when he apparently thought he was about to be mugged again.
The first time that a victim is attacked, the predominant experience of that victim is to feel that their life is in danger and that they're not going to live. I don't know Goetz, so this is purely speculative on my part. But I do know, after working with victims who have been victimized twice, especially the same crime, which this was in Goetz's case, a mugging, a robbery, that frequently the individual, in order to maintain that self that I was talking about earlier, tells himself, if it ever happened again, that I would react differently. Individuals may even consciously or unconsciously wish for the opportunity to demonstrate this to themselves, that they are not the same person they were when this happened to them the first time.
Rose Farrow knows a lot about victims. The owner of a restaurant around the corner from Bernhard Goetz's apartment, she had worked with Goetz to try and rid their neighborhood of dope dealers and other criminals.
Now every store has been held up. We have a lot of muggings going on. People are afraid to cross 14th Street, north and south. You take your life into your hands walking around here. McDonald's has been held up on the robbery. The vegetable store across the street from where I am has been held up 3 times in the past few months. The delicatessen also has been held up. The bar down the block, the Newz Tavern, they've been held up in the afternoon. I have my hands full here at least once a week minimum, where I have a drug pusher walking in or somebody who's on drugs walking in, and they have harassed customers here. I've been physically harassed myself. The police are aware of this, and all they say is that their hands are tied.
The basic argument that has been sharpened is whether or not the social contract can be honored. That is, can government protect citizens? And quite a few people feel that this is no longer the case, and that is why you have an increase in the carrying of handguns by citizens who in the past would not even consider such.
Hayward Burns, director of the Center for Legal Education and Public Policy at City College, says there's a flip side to that.
I think that what people are not getting at is the way in which this case really speaks to the larger questions of what's going on out there in the streets. And by that I mean not just the victims of crimes, of muggers, but also the questions that, as the social psychologist Kenneth Clark said, of mugged communities. And by that I mean the way in which these boys certainly are victims of, as well, of a society that has not really cared for them or cared about them. And in a very real way, I think this case raises the issues of society's neglect and society's abuse. You have only to walk to the South Bronx and walk through the South Bronx and see what we're doing in this community and in this society to our young people. If you look around, you see how people are penned in the hovels of the barrios and the ghettos, the kind of housing people have to live in, what's happening with the joblessness of black youth and Hispanic youth, but the kind of psychological deprivation where all around the message is coming through to people, young people out there, that we don't care about you as a society, that we don't think you're worth very much.
The 4 young men who were shot by Bernhard Goetz all lived in this South Bronx neighborhood. All jobless high school dropouts, ages 18 and 19, each had records for minor crimes, including possession of stolen property, breaking into video games, and in one case, Darrell Cabey had been arrested on charges of armed robbery, though not tried by the time of the subway shooting. No charges have been filed against any of them in the subway incident. Of the four, KB, shot in the back, was the most seriously wounded. The only one remaining in the hospital, KB is in a coma, believed to have suffered brain damage and is paralyzed from the waist down. The families would not speak on camera, citing threats that they had received since the incident. Ron Kuby, a lawyer working with the KB family, agrees with the analysis that KB and the others were victims, not only of their environments, but of racism.
One of the most dramatic aspects of this is the types of correspondence that Darrell KB and his mother have received in the weeks following his shooting. A couple examples of letters. One we received, it says, "Dear Mrs. KB, I'm glad Darrell is paralyzed. He needs to sit his black ass in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. I'm so sorry that the other three can't join him." Other letters contained overt racial epithets, racial slurs. And just recently in the mail we received this, anonymously of course. Another letter to Darrell says, "I guess you won't be breakdancing anymore. Don't worry, if you're a good boy, I'll buy you a pair of roller skates."
Given the vehemence and range of reaction to the subway shooting, what are the consequences for the future? Dan Judah believes that society has to regard both Bernard Goetz and the young men he shot as victims. Co-victims, in fact. Otherwise,
there's going to come a period of real trouble in this country, where you have people who are committing crimes against more and more educated victims. And as you become more and more educated victims, you protect yourself in a better and better manner, then the criminal will have to become a better and better criminal.
I don't think we're all going to go pop off people. I do think we have other ways. We can elect people who appeal to our anger and our fear, and we can elect people with a vigilante kind of mentality. And that process may have already started.
Hayward Burns says condoning vigilantism spells trouble for everybody, criminal and victim, black and white, poor and non-poor.
And the majority who have that point of view will press it and act upon it at their peril, at all of our peril, because the implications of what follows from that point of view is a society that none of us want.
As for the legal side of the case, the grand jury is awaiting a decision from Goetz about whether he will testify before it. All other witnesses in the case have been heard. Goetz's lawyer, Joseph Kellner, postponed his announced plans to make the decision today and said instead it will come tomorrow. Meanwhile, Goetz remains free on $50,000 bail.
Yeah, we are tonight, but we do want to know this. It's a major decision by your side that you've said all along that you want to go in and testify.
Oh, please.
Now you'll be doing it.
No questions now, guys.
Bernie, what about the likelihood that your videotaped confession will be shown on national TV? What are your feelings about that?
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
How do you feel about it?
I say that you guys, you guys are something else.
Somebody's gotten a hold of the tape. They plan to air it. Is this good or is this bad that people will see what you said in New Hampshire?
I don't think it's proper.
Proper?
Because it's being done without my consent, you know.
You don't feel it's proper that it should be aired? Bernie?
He decided he's not just to say, fellas, we want to be nice. He's exhausted. He doesn't want to talk anymore tonight. There'll be other opportunities. Please respect that, will you?
Can we ride down with you?
Down, please.
No.
We'll meet you downstairs. Okay. Please.
You want to go aboard?
Won't you please step out? Please? We're exhausted, fellas. We're not trying to be mean about it, all right?
You've got the tape. You're going to run it on 2020, correct?
The final decision hasn't been made. We do have the tape. Yeah.
Videotape?
Right.
From New Hampshire?
Yes, it was taken.
Finally tonight, we focus on the Bernard Goetz phenomenon, or one aspect, the media treatment of the New York subway gunman who was arraigned today on charges of attempted murder. Charlene Hunter-Gault has been collecting views on how the media have used Bernard Goetz, or how they've been used. Charlene?
Robin, since last December when Bernard Goetz shot 4 black teenagers in a New York City subway, there has been a mounting debate not only about the incident itself, but about how the media have covered it. On that level, indictments abound.
As a group, not you, John, but as a group, I found the press to be some of the most dishonest,
unethical people that I've ever met, with perhaps the exception of politicians, and I've never seen such a group of people with a dog-eat-dog attitude.
To say that we're all just slobbering because we want a big deal story and sell a lot of papers, that's probably true too on some days. I hope it isn't, but yeah. We get there, yeah. We're newspaper people, and by our very blood, sure, we like to cover stories, and this one is a honey.
If a story is sensational, there's only one way to write it, and that's sensationally.
It has been treated from the very beginning as a sensational story, galvanizing media attention not only in New York and the nation, but around the world.
Today, the man who's hailed by many Americans as a Vigilante-style hero faced attempted murder charges at New York Criminal Court.
Der Täter, Bernhard Hugo Goetz, stellt sich der Polizei. Vor 4 Jahren wurde er ausgeraubt und verletzt.
めったに利用することはありませんけれども、いつも乗るときに顔がこわばってくるのを感じます。
One newspaper editor calls it one of the most fascinating and toughest stories of our time. And the reams of news copy and columnists arguing pro and con support that notion. Initially, Goetz was widely portrayed as an avenging angel, early on compared with the vengeful killer in the movie Death Wish. Two lawyers on opposite sides who rarely agree think for different reasons that the media jump to conclusions. Joseph Kellner, an attorney for Goetz, found fault with the media's treatment of a damaging videotaped confession made by New Hampshire police shortly after Goetz surrendered there 9 days after the shooting. It was a while before any of it surfaced in the media. Still, Joseph Kellner argues it did not show the actual state of mind his client was in, even when it did surface.
He said on the videotape that he snapped, that he went out of control, and he did all these horrible things that turned him into something like a monster, like an animal, like a cornered rat, as he described himself, in his fight for survival in a 4-on-1 confrontation, when he was afraid that he was going to be maimed again, if not worse. And the media did not do sufficient analysis of that before they plunged into calling him a subway avenger.
They elevated him, this emotionally disturbed young man, and a would-be murderer. They elevated him to hero status, to St. George slaying the dragon, to Robin Hood, to Charles Bronson in Death Wish, and they made him into a national hero without knowing any of the underlying facts.
Not that the public wasn't getting facts. They were finding out what Goetz had for lunch after his first arraignment.
The waste of this fantastic medium, television, in dwelling on what kind of sandwich or what kind of lunch did Mr. Goetz have when he took refuge from the crowd of media surrounding his apartment house. They followed him to New Jersey. He ordered lunch. A whole swarm of cameras came in to the diner and asked, what did he have for lunch? And they said, well, he had his favorite lunch. What was it? It was turkey on whole wheat bread. What kind of dressing did he have? He didn't have dressing. He had only a slice of tomato.
The general public impression is of a pack, out of control, going after sensational details, personal details, and forgetting, the principles, the who, what, why, where, going after the personality and the style, going after the sizzle, and neglecting the steak.
One of New York's most intrepid local TV reporters acknowledged the failing in an editorial commentary.
I think we failed in not turning a stronger light sooner on this man and his motivations. We're supposed to be balanced and fair. A knight in shining armor, he isn't. And I hope the honeymoon between Bernhard Goetz and the New York press is finally over.
But there was more information to come in that was to alter the picture being painted in the newspapers and on television, not just of the 4 teenagers, but of Goetz as well. In the police's videotaped confession from New Hampshire, Goetz said he had fired 4 shots, then said to one of the young men, "You don't look so bad, here's another." He then fired a 5th time. When statements like that began surfacing in the media, public support of Goetz began shifting somewhat. William Kunstler is among those who argue that such information should have been ferreted out earlier.
A lot of his New Hampshire statements were there for everyone to see. We had a copy in this office, and I'm sure the press did too, where the statement appears, I felt one, he didn't look so bad, so I shot him again. That kind of thing.
Daily News editor Gil Spencer denies that such information was accessible early on.
I think this paper has been pretty much where it should have been, and the things came out from the police, which the police had held secret. We had not seen those statements. Newspapers do get lucky occasionally and get underneath and grab something out from under a rock, but in this case, no, that didn't happen.
Reporting starts when information is inaccessible. If it's accessible, it's a press release. Someone said that a newspaper is information. News is what someone wants to keep secret. Everything else is advertisement.
Some critics argue that the media failed to pursue the facts because it was pandering to public opinion.
It was a vicious cycle. The media thought it understood the public reaction, and that the public reaction was going to be totally favorable. They anticipated that the frustration and the rage on the part of many people who have been mugged and so on would make Goetz into a hero, and therefore I think they pandered to that feeling just as the politicians did.
It's not political leadership and it's not journalism. You're not supposed to find out what people want or what prejudices people have or what emotional outpourings people have and then go satisfied. Oh, sure, it's one kind of journalism, maybe. You know, people want women wrestling in mud wrestling. Should we give it to them?
It's ridiculous to say we're pandering. We've obviously swooped on it, grabbed it, and shook it because we saw such a gigantic public interest in it, obviously. But let's face it, we're all sick and tired of being scared. That's the bottom line.
Newsday's Payne says the media pandered to racial biases.
You cannot understand, analyze properly this case unless you consider the race factor. Those 4 teenagers were allowed to be 4 members of a monolith. They were gangsters, they were street-hardened kids, they had screwdrivers, they had criminal records, and therefore they deserved to be shot.
Those 4 kids could have quite easily been white guys. You know, I've been on subways and been hassled and hustled by white guys just as easy as black guys. I don't think there's too much of a real, genuine feeling of racism.
There are those who assert that Goetz and his lawyers are not blameless in attempting to manipulate the media to their advantage. Indeed, Goetz has generally made himself available to the media, turning up at the funeral of a man killed in Harlem, urging citizens to arm themselves in self-defense, dining with Barbara Walters on a Chinese takeout dinner she brought to his apartment for an interview. Some even accuse the lawyers of trying to argue their case in the media rather than in the courts.
The attorneys have been accused of trying this case in the news media. And I am very proud to say that when I saw distortion, I nailed it to the best of my ability.
But Goetz's first lawyer says he pulled out of the case over disagreements about how to conduct the defense.
And not only is it a breach of professional ethics to go public with alleged statements, confessions, and other tidbits, which, of course, the press, understandably, would soak up, but it also does not serve the client.
But beyond the trial, observers still differ on whether all of that coverage will finally affect public attitudes.
He's been called the Subway Avenger, murderer, and various other things. And I suggest that there are many forces that are in effect ganging up on him with a lot of publicity, which I think is utterly ridiculous and prejudicial.
If we try cases in the newspapers or on television, we actually pervert the administration of justice.
Now, whether that's racism or classism or just sappiness and dumbness, you know, I hope it's the latter, because that would imply that it's correctable anyway. I think this is a case that we all should study and look at.
Whether the case is studied or not, there now seems to be a widespread feeling that a full-scale trial will finally produce a more reasoned examination of this complicated and highly emotional case.
Bernhard Goetz bent over one of his wounded victims last December and said, "You don't look too bad, here's another," and shot him again. That testimony came from a detective in Concord, New Hampshire, where Goetz turned himself in. Goetz, who claims he shot the youths in self-defense, appeared at a pretrial hearing today. He later had this comment.
I think that one of the factors that would help reduce violent crime greatly in this city is if there were more licensed, competent people to carry guns. Now, I realize that that is an unpopular view in New York, but I think it's an important factor.
As Goetz left the court, he was the target of demonstrators, one of whom shouted, "He should be ashamed to show his face," unquote. New York's subway shooting. When Bernhard Goetz shot and wounded 4 young men last month after they allegedly accosted him on the subway, it touched off a profound nationwide response. Today, a grand jury acted in the case. Harold Dow reports.
You'll ask many questions.
The grand jury chose not to indict Bernhard Goetz on 4 counts of attempted murder. Instead, the so-called subway vigilante was indicted only for 3 weapons violations. The shootings occurred 3 days before Christmas. Goetz wounded 4 young men on a New York City subway. He said they were trying to rob him. Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau.
What the grand jury decided here was that this man was unlawfully carrying a pistol, and he's charged with that. I think that they also found that he used justifiable force to protect himself from an attempted robbery.
Goetz's attorney, Joseph Kellner, says his client is not out of the woods yet, but he's confident.
I think he should walk out. I'm not going to predict anything in the future any more than I have up to this time. I've merely stated that right across the board he will not plead guilty or plea bargain to anything. As of this time, I have no notion that anything else will take place.
The subway vigilante has been the subject of a sharp national debate. Did he act properly, or was the shooting simply criminal?
It happens that public opinion in this country, and I am in accord with public opinion, believes that the criminal justice system isn't working, that the pendulum has swung too far in favor of protecting the rights of those charged with criminality.
I think there'll be a temptation now for everybody to read into this and to say, well, this is the grand jury saying in effect that it's all right to carry a gun and waste people or try to. That's not responsible.
Well, I think the Goetz situation and the grand jury's action really demonstrates once again quite clearly people's outrage to the kind of criminal behavior that is taking place.
3 of the young men Bernhard Goetz shot are out of the hospital. A 4th is paralyzed and in a coma. The subway vigilante is free on $50,000 bail. No date has been set for the trial. He could get 7 years in jail if convicted, not of using his pistol, but for illegally possessing it. Harold Dow, CBS News, New York.
He shot a group of alleged teenage muggers on a New York City subway train. Today, he is back in the news. Some key charges against him have been dropped. Victoria Corderi reports.
More than a year after Bernhard Goetz shot 4 teenagers in a Manhattan subway, a New York judge has dropped the attempted murder and assault charges against him.
The worst is over. Hopefully this horrible nightmare will end for him.
Goetz contended all along the youths were out to rob him. The judge ruled the grand jury was improperly instructed about Goetz's right to self-defense. He also said 2 of Goetz's victims may have lied to the grand jury. The celebrated subway shooting case has gone before 2 grand juries, the first indicting him on weapons charges, the second adding a murder and assault indictment. Now the district attorney's office is considering taking the case to a 3rd grand jury. Public sentiment over this legal tug-of-war continues to be split.
You're talking about the subways in New York, and you have to defend yourself, and that's all you can really do.
He should have been put away for it. One of Goetz's victims remains partially paralyzed in a New York hospital. 2 others are in jail on unrelated charges. Bernhard Goetz still faces weapons charges, but his attorneys are hoping to have those dropped as well. Victoria Corderi, CBS News, New York.
Next tonight, the aftermath of the verdict in the Bernhard Goetz case. In 1984, Goetz shot 4 black teenagers in a New York subway, claiming he thought they were going to rob him. Yesterday, a New York jury found him not guilty of all attempted murder and assault charges, but guilty on 1 count of criminal possession of a gun. In a moment, the views of a lawyer, a psychologist, and a columnist on the verdict and the possible consequences. But first, correspondent June Massell has a report on the New York City reaction.
The most controversial case of crime to come out of New York subways is finally over this evening.
It was the lead story on all the television news programs last night, and today the front page of all New York's newspapers. Virtually everyone was reading about and reacting to the Bernhard Goetz verdict.
Do you agree with the Goetz verdict?
No, I don't. I think it was enough for him to point the gun, and allowing someone to do that is just going to set a precedent, which it's not going to be good in the city.
I think it's okay.
Because?
Because I'm tired, like everyone else, of violence on subways and violence, period. And if that helps that, people standing up for their rights, if that helps solve that problem, I think that's fine.
I don't think he did anything serious. Those people deserve to be killed.
Do you think this is going to increase vigilantism in New York?
I think it might.
How so?
Well, people are going to see that one man did, quote unquote, get away with it. They may not understand his extenuating circumstances, as far as I'm concerned, that there's some kind of, emotional disturbance there. And they may just think that, sure, they can carry a gun or a knife and do the same thing.
If I was on the train and I'm going to shoot these people, now I'm black. Okay, if I would have done that, I probably would have got life. I probably would have got, some kind of sentence, 3 to 4 or something, but I wouldn't have came off like the way he did. He came off scot-free.
But the jurors insist the verdict was not based on racism.
Not once in our deliberations in that room did the racial aspect come into this to play.
It was about a man and 4 other men in the subway. The fact that he was white and they were black is immaterial. We had facts and evidence to base all this on, and the charges from the judge, and none of that had anything to do with white and black.
What kind of a message do you think this verdict sends?
I personally am not interested in messages. That wasn't my job there to send messages to anybody. I'm not out to convince 8 million New Yorkers or 200 million Americans what was going on in that train that day or what they should feel. People are going to feel the way they want to feel, no matter what I say.
The judge told the jury part of its job was to determine if Goetz had acted reasonably, like any other reasonable man might have acted in that situation.
We understood Mr. Goetz's past, what had happened to him previous in his life. He had been the victim of a rather serious attack on himself on the street, where he did try to retreat, was caught, and beaten up rather severely by 2 or 3 people. When he got on that train that day, we felt there was nowhere for him to retreat to. We felt, based on the threat that we felt was in front of him, he was reasonable as the law allows, in the actions he took.
During the trial, one of the most damaging pieces of evidence against Goetz was a videotaped statement he had made to police 9 days after the shooting.
If I had more bullets, I would have shot them all again and again.
But the jury was not persuaded.
It was my belief, and I believe the general belief of the jury, that this statement was made by a man who was in a very precarious mental state at that time. So we didn't give it as much credence as people would want to hear us say we gave.
Now that it's all over, Goetz's attorney says his client wants to go back to being a normal citizen.
All he wants to do right now is fade into the woodwork. This has been a terrible chapter in his life.
First, we look at the legal ramifications with George Fletcher, a law professor at Columbia University. He's writing a book about the Goetz case and attended the trial from the beginning. Mr. Fletcher, why did the judge call it the most difficult case of our time?
I think it is one of the most difficult cases of our time. And the reason is that it comes at the intersection of 2 major conflicting social and legal trends. On the one hand, we have a growing interest in the right of self-defense, an expansion of the circumstances under which people can use deadly force to protect themselves. But on the other hand, we have a growing concern about victims' rights, and particularly a commitment to equal justice for black victims. This case is the collision point between those trends.
And as far as legal precedent is concerned, created by this verdict, the Houston Chronicle said today the Goetz case is the Goetz case and not much else. Now, is that right?
Well, I think it's right and wrong, and it's right in the sense that the case is obviously not a precedent. It won't be relied upon in the future. There was a Court of Appeals decision on the standard for self-defense, but we're speaking about the verdict by the jury. On the other hand, the case is symptomatic of a general trend in the United States and a concern of a large number of people about the scope of self-defense. So it is a significant legal event that will become part of our folklore in this country, part of our legal folklore.
Well, does it send no signal that will be heeded by prosecutors, by defense attorneys, by juries down the line in other cities and other states? You say it won't be cited, but...
It may be taken seriously as evidence of a jury's disposition to convict in a borderline case like this. The facts of this case, which were so difficult to interpret, fall really on the borderline between legitimate self-defense and a homicidal assault.
His lawyers said the jury found that he used an illegal gun in a legal act. Do you agree with that description?
Oh, well, if on the assumption that he acted justifiably, which the jury found, that's absolutely right. The fact that he held the gun illegally has no bearing upon whether he used it legitimately.
The gun charge is a felony in New York. Given his history, what kind of a prison sentence, if any, is he likely to get?
He could get up to a 7-year maximum penalty. I think that's extremely unlikely. In his discretion, the judge could give him probation.
I heard someone say, some legal authority say on one of the television stations in New York last night, that in New York State it is common for a first offender in a situation like that not to be sent to jail.
Yes, I think that's right. There's no prior criminal record in this case. I think there are many factors that would speak in favor of mitigation.
So it is possible that he will not go to jail at all.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll come back. With us now to discuss some broader issues are Les Payne, Assistant Managing Editor for the Long Island newspaper Newsday, and Daniel Judah, an Associate Professor of Psychology at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. Mr. Payne, what kind of a signal does this verdict send to society, and what are the practical consequences of that signal on the streets?
I think the most profound effect of the decision will be felt those people who see themselves similarly situated to the victims as opposed to Mr. Goetz. And I think that what I'm hearing, I do not obviously speak for them, but what I'm hearing is that they consider this to be a miscarriage of justice. They see it to be kind of a racially biased assault on reasoning, and also a distortion, I agree with this, a distortion of the concept of self-defense. It seemed to me that that ruling, the one charge, says, as Mr. Slotnick tried to frame it his way, that
Slotnick
Mr.
was
Goetz,
the defense lawyer.
The defense lawyer, with his statement that he used an illegal gun legally. I think that the best spin on that one is that the gun, the .38 caliber pistol that Mr. Goetz carried, was illegal until he used it. And then once he used it, it was no longer illegal. It was okay then. And I think one of the most profound and troubling aspects of that is, if you want to start from the bottom, is to look at the charge of reckless endangerment. Here was firing on a subway. What if he had an Uzi, for instance? Obviously, he didn't.
Machine gun.
A machine gun. Then you have people who are on that subway, and the charge of reckless endangerment even did not come into play. So I think the signal it sends to people similarly situated, people who are black, particularly in New York City, is that they wonder, and I along with them, whether or not this case, this verdict, this jury verdict, is extending to white male civilians, a right which we sometimes believe that police already enjoy, and that is the right to kill or to maim black human beings without conviction, and in some cases, as with Goetz, the public applauding such an attack.
Dr. Judah, what kind of signal do you think it sends to society, and what will be the consequences on the streets?
I think it depends on which group in society you're speaking about. If you're speaking about a group that has a history of being victimized brutally and atrociously for centuries, namely a minority or a black population, then it is very likely that they will receive this as a horror and reaffirmation of a power, oppressive power over them. And they will experience now what, in fact, Goetz experienced in a miniature form in his previous victimizations. I think for those of us who have been victims, in general, there's going to be an enormous relief and sigh of sharing the pain. That is what an Argentinian physician, Norberto Lusky, has discovered in his work with victims of the disappeared in Argentina, that in order for people to heal from this kind of victimization process, they must have the pain shared by the culture, which is the function that this program is serving, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be on the show.
Does it license or legitimize people who feel victimized, as apparently so many do in this society, to take action?
I think there's the possibility of that, moving off of one of your final points, and that is that I think this is not self-defense, but a preemptive attack. And if you view it as a preemptive attack, I think what we have here is Mr. Goetz striking before he felt that he was going to be struck. And if you reason away from that position, it somehow seemed to me that where does it end? Obviously, it's a breakdown in society's laws, but beyond that, in a more precise way, I think an individual might very well, on a subway in New York, say, aha, if the likes of Mr. Goetz, using the same kind of bias that Mr. Goetz employed, which I think is racial, would say that, okay, if Mr. Goetz feels threatened by me, he's going to attack me before I attack him, then why not those who look like him and are bespectacled, blonde, slim, etc.? Why should I not strike before they would strike me? And I think that's a very dangerous street precedent. Now, it may not have legal precedence as has been presented here, but I think the precedent on the street could very well be found.
Will people who feel victimized because of the amount of crime that is rampant feel now entitled to take action?
There is a growing movement in this country of victims that is organized in Washington, and victims' rights and position throughout the legal structure of this country are only now, for the first time, being formulated. It is, in my opinion, that many people who have experienced post-traumatic stress or victimization will often spend the rest of their lives recuperating from these injuries. If you have been victimized, it is very likely that one of the options you will consider if you are to be victimized a second time is to prevent that victimization occurring, so that you won't have to have an additional process to work through, whether it be in your own psyche or in your families or in your loved ones. So I would say that it is possible that for some victims they will now realize that this is an option that is sanctioned or could be sanctioned by the culture.
Let's put this in terms everybody can understand. Are a lot more people now going to take the law into their own hands as a result of this verdict?
I disagree strongly. I don't think that it's proper to read this decision as recognizing a right to respond with force to people who ask for $5 on the subway.
Not proper to, but will they?
Well, that's very difficult to tell. I mean, if it happens, then these people will be arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. I mean, it may be that some people will... now, it is significant that there have been very few imitations of the Goetz incident in the first 2.5 years. There's no reason to suppose it'll be different now after the verdict.
What do you think?
Well, they may be also arrested, brought to trial, and let go, except on a minor charge. My concern is rather stronger than that, in the sense that I think what we may see happening here is that people will take action, will begin to arm themselves. There's a possibility of that. I'm not predicting gloom and doom here. I'm not a soothsayer.
What would prevent that? What would stop that? Police forces in all the cities of America involved taking very strong action immediately, or what? What would stop that?
The fair administration of justice. I think that law enforcement that is not racially biased. I think that in the specific case of these particular victims, I think that, by the way, the juror during your piece there saying that race was not a factor, I think is absurd. Race has... You cannot, it seems to me, understand or rule intelligently on this case without taking into account the factor of race.
You sat through the whole trial. Yes. Do you agree with the juror, or do you agree with Mr. Payne?
Well, I think race entered into this case, but in a very subtle way. I don't think it was simply a matter of black against white, because it was a fact that the black witnesses on the train feared these 4 kids as much, if not more, than the white witnesses. I think the blackness of the 4 assailants bore upon the jury's assessment of the reasonableness of Goetz's fear. But I think that would also be the case if it were a black defendant. And this is a very difficult problem. It's hard to know how one should deal with this racial aspect of the case.
But the racial nexus of it seems to me undoubtedly is the fact that, in Goetz's own words, that he had been attacked in 1981 by blacks, youth.
That didn't come out in the trial, interestingly enough. The jury was not told that Fred Clark was a black.
Yeah, okay, but Goetz knew that, and what I'm describing rather is how the chain of reaction that led to Goetz's final act. And what he says is that there were blacks, and he saw in that, you know, his prior attackers.
I'd like to finally have a couple of minutes to ask each of you this. Is the court, the jury, which was praised significantly by the judge for demonstrating the health and of the American judicial system, the court system, is it acknowledging, in a way, that society can no longer protect, the organized instruments of society can no longer protect the citizen from law and order? And will it be read that way?
Well, I think everyone knows that organized police can no longer categorically protect everyone. They never could protect everyone. Otherwise, we would have a law of self-defense.
Is this New York jury reasonable and informed and concerned and responsible, as the judge said it was? Is it saying, we now know it can't?
No, I don't think so.
It is not.
I think that they approach the case as a micro problem and not as a macro problem.
What do you think?
What I think is that the jury and the American people are going to understand that when you are victimized, you are going to go through your own personal process. What Goetz did here was his own personal process as a result of previous victimizations. How people will react to their own victimizations varies enormously.
But previously, society has said it is impermissible for a person to translate his own previous victimization into a preemptive action.
Then we wouldn't have had the American Revolution.
Yeah. Well, are you saying this has now changed that equation?
I think that there is a growing realization in this country of what victimization does to a human being. I think that if I were black, I would be very concerned about what this decision means for blacks. If I were a victim and not black, I'd be very pleased to know that there was some recognition that the victim process is real and leads to real behavioral results.
Well, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. And thank you all very much, Mr. Flesser, Mr. Payne, and Dr. Judah, for joining us.
Reporting. The subway vigilante. Those words applied to a slender 39-year-old electronics technician from New York. They triggered international controversy ever since December of 1984. That's when Bernhard Goetz used an unlicensed revolver to shoot 4 young men on a subway. Goetz went on trial charged with 13 counts, including attempted murder. Today, in its 4th day of deliberation, after a 7-week trial, a jury brought in its verdict. Our coverage begins with Richard Roth.
His lawyers had called Bernhard Goetz a decent citizen with a right to fight back against crime on a New York subway, and the argument convinced the jury. The jury convicted Goetz only on a felony weapons charge, possession of the pistol he used to shoot 4 black teenagers he said were about to rob him. All 4 were wounded in the shooting 2.5 years ago, one of the young men paralyzed for life. And though Goetz had admitted in a confession to police that he wanted to murder the youths when he fired 5 times, his argument in court was that the shooting was justifiable self-defense.
He was very pleased. It was as if a great burden was lifted off of him, and he's trying to figure out how he can go back to living a normal life. What's he going to do tonight, Mr. Will he move from New York? At the present moment, he has no plans except to go back to work, which is something he hasn't been able to do for 2.5 years.
There will be criticism and there will be support, the judge told the jury after their decision was in. He called this case one of the most difficult of our time and added its emotion will last beyond this verdict. Richard Roth, CBS News, New York.
More than anything, the Bernhard Goetz case symbolized fear and frustration.
I'm sitting on a train, 4 kids come to me, and I got a weapon, I'm going to use it.
The American preoccupation with crime, the rage against the system of police and courts and prisons that seemingly tipped the scales in favor of the bad guys.
The public has become increasingly frustrated with putting the criminals' rights first. And so we're seeing in community after community the actual public and the victims taking criminal justice matters in their own hands.
Justice in their own hands, just like in the movies. Goetz touched a nerve. Charles Bronson made them cheer in the theaters. The so-called subway vigilante was life imitating art.
Because any way that could have prevented that, I would have, whether it was me or him, because he had a gun on me.
Just a month after Goetz, a 68-year-old Chicago man shoots and kills a teenage gunman trying to rob him. A case of self-defense, say police, another case of justice in the hands of the public. But how much of this justice is justifiable?
People like Goetz have apparently come to the conclusion that they're not being protected elsewhere and there's no one else between them and adversity but them.
If the police aren't doing enough, then neither are the prisons. In California, outraged citizens protest the arrival of a paroled rapist in their city, and he's literally hounded from town to town. More fear, more frustration. And in New York this month, more rage. A woman is attacked by a knife-wielding man. The alleged assailant, captured by neighbors, has a record of 10 previous arrests, everything from robbery to rape.
And when you find a very frightened, frustrated public, the gut reaction is aggression. And that's what you find in the Bernard Goetz case.
But some experts in the criminal justice system say that while the fear and frustration is understandable, it is also irrational. At a time when some people wish to put more of justice in their own hands, all the numbers indicate that crime is on a downward trend. What's really on the increase, say the experts, is fear. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Mario! The white bus.
Yeah, I'm going with this one.
Did you copy tape? Excuse me. Let's go, Leon.
Hey, Johnson, take that back in. Hey, Reggie. What's Reggie? All right, clear the area. Please move out of the way. Guys, please clear the street.
And sit and have lunch with everybody, Investigator King and Jillian Coulter and Mark Baker,
could you just tell us
talk
what
about the
happened
nice
on
weekend
there?
we're going to have.
Could you tell us what happened there?
I got a free subway ride. First free train ride I've had in my life.
No, I mean it.
So do I. Not really. I don't think it'll be appropriate. You'll hear all about it at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Right, we're doing the stand-up.
I don't know. He may be over there. I'm looking for him.
No, I haven't. Give another hug. Hey, Barry. Over here, guys.
Thank you. Matt, we'll see you.
Yeah, I wanted, if I can find Mark, I want to congratulate him. I saw him when he came out.
Why not?
You don't have to rush. Careful, Barry. You don't have to rush. No big deal. Ride the train, Barry. Right.
Get to the last race to stop.
Like they didn't get the day of
But Harry's taking him away from New York City tonight?
Good luck, John.
Barry, one more time. Barry,
Where's your victory party?
You still in fight? You still in fight?
You see Frank at all?
No, I was
Barry, what did Barry say to you? Right afterwards. He just looked over and he sighed and said thank you. I am. I'm looking for Frank King.
Gotta get some of the crowd.
Barry, you took off.
Get some of the crowd. Yeah, right. He's playing. Get the crowd.
No, he's looking for Frank. Frank, back up.
Barry, Frank took off.
Oh, thank you. Not taking.
Frank took off.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Frank took off. Okay. Where'd he go?
Upstairs, second.
Let's go now.
The office.
Oh, he is? All right, so I'll stop by there.
We need your line. If we can. We need your line.
Watch your back, Steve.
Together, please. For a second.
Come on, don't lose him.
Take care. Okay. All right. Maybe we'll have some peace and brotherhood.
Come on. I hope so.
Do
you offend landlord?
No.
I got problems. Let him go, Steve. Let him go, Steve. Let him go. Let him go. Watch me. Let him go. I ain't doing no more.
That's why I got it back.
Police Officer Maldonado, the New York Transit Police Department.
Closer to the VA.
The Transit Police and the City Police are seeking information in connection with the shooting of
Officer, you have to...
You can't even hear me. No, I can't. Good afternoon, may I have your attention?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. I am Police Officer Carmen Maldonado. I work with the Transit Police Department. The Transit Police Department and the New York City Police Department are seeking information in connection with the shooting of 4 people aboard the Brooklyn-bound number 2 train near Chambers Street on Saturday, December 22nd, 1984. Any person having information about the man responsible for the shooting, please call 334-0635 or contact us on the train. Have a nice day. Thank you.
It's Christmas.
Transit Police Department and the New York City Police Department is seeking information in reference to the shooting last Saturday aboard a Brooklyn-bound number 2 train at Chambers Street. Anyone with any information, please contact the New York City Police Department, the Transit Police Department, or any police officer with this information. Thank you. Have a nice Christmas. I'll do one more call. On a southbound or Brooklyn-bound number 2 train last Saturday at Chambers Street. Anyone having any information, please contact the New York City Police Department, Transit Police Department, or any police officer in reference to any information leading to the capture of this man. Have a nice Christmas. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice Christmas.
Mind if I hang on to that?
All right. Thank you very much. Any information, if you know anybody who has any information, please contact the New York City Transit Police, New York City Police Department, or any police officer with this information. Thank you very much. Have a nice Christmas. To go around giving you what we have. If you know anybody, please contact the police department or any police officer. The 4 fellas that got shot, right? We're looking for this man here, in reference to the shooting, right? If you have any information, just contact the police department, transit police, or any police officer.
Okay.
All right? Okay. Does it look familiar? No. No? Okay. Thank you very much. Have a nice Christmas.
Thank you.
Police Department are seeking any information. If you have any information, please contact any police precinct or call 334-0635. Have a nice Christmas.
You too. Of the man wanted in connection with the shooting at Chambers Street on Saturday. We're desperately looking for this man. If you have any information in regards to that shooting, please contact New York City Transit Police Department or New York City Police Department or any police officer that you see in the city with this information. Thank you very much. Have a nice Christmas. 3, we would really like to get in touch with anybody, right, who has any information about this shooting. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I don't have any more to hand out. Have a nice Christmas.
I go through the train. He's wanted for shooting 4 individuals on a 2 train last Saturday.
I'm sure you've seen the post and everything. Actually,
it's all over the headlines.
New York City Transit Police Department at 330-3000, 330-3881. With the information. Okay? You don't want to step forward now. Any information that we can kept completely confidential. You're embarrassed right now. Go home, pick up that telephone. 330-3881. He looks familiar. We'd like some information about him.
President of the United States.
Yeah, well, that's another one. That's another culprit. We don't need that information. We need this guy right now. If you have any information about this guy, we need it. Contact New York City Police Department or New York City Transit Police Department. Thank you. Have a nice Christmas.